You see knights wearing a cloak or a surcoat over their armor all the time. If they're a member of a well-known knightly order, the symbols and the color schemes are instantly recognizable. But what did these surcoats mean? How did they function on the battlefield, and what benefits do they provide? These are the questions that we're going to answer. Naturally, surcoats changed over time, so for our purposes today we'll focus on surcoats of the 13th century. Plate armor at this time was minimal, and the most common type of armor worn by the English knight was mail. It basically covered the body from head to toe. The mail served a utilitarian function, and that was to prevent a sword blade from piercing the body. It was also moderately effective against spear points and arrows, and less effective against bone-crushing blunted objects like hammers and maces, but we'll have to save that subject for another time. The cloth surcoat was worn over the top of the mail, but its purpose wasn't to provide protection. The surcoat is thought to have originated in the second half of the 12th century, say 1150 or shortly thereafter, and had become ubiquitous by the 13th century. The length wasn't uniform. They ranged from just above the knee to around the ankles, but most often they were full length, extending to the mid-calf or lower. They were sleeveless, and they were cut, split down the front and the back to allow the wearer of the garment to easily ride a horse. The man-at-arms was your everyday soldier. He may very well have been a knight or a nobleman, or he might have been a fully armored, mounted cavalryman, without the distinction of any special social position. In other words, a professional soldier. His surcoat, whether emblazoned with some form of heraldic device or simply a design or bright color, could distinguish him during the maelstrom and chaos of battle. Let's take a look at a surcoat of mine. Mail like this would have been worn underneath. This surcoat is intended to appear as belonging to a knight of the Order of the Hospitallers, which was a Catholic military order that was founded around the beginning of the 12th century with the purpose of providing for the needs of poor and sick pilgrims journeying to the Holy Land. The Maltese cross is instantly recognizable. You've probably seen it countless times. I've often wanted to make surcoats for myself for at least two reasons. The first being that given the remarkable variety of designs and colors that one will notice when looking at surcoats in medieval manuscripts and illustrations, it's readily apparent, at least to me, that the large area on the shield and on the front, and perhaps the back of the surcoat, gave knights and man-at-arms ample opportunity to express their individuality. Consider the symbols: a cross, a pair of rampant lions, a bird of prey, and later a coat of arms passed down from generation to generation. And he wore these into battle. They were an expression of what he believed, perhaps what he hoped to be, courageous and victorious. They were personal in some ways and certainly significant. I've spent more time than you can imagine thinking about how I might design several for myself for these reasons. Another justification for making surcoats myself, and this is a much more prosaic reason, is that anything not tailored to your own measurements tends to fit poorly. The Hospitaller surcoat, although not the best fit for me, can serve as a pattern of sorts that can be easily altered. Before we get sidetracked too far, let's go back to our original questions. How did they function on the battlefield? In other words, what were they designed to do? The highly regarded arms and armor enthusiast and prolific writer Ewart Oakeshott surmised in his book, A Knight in His Armor, that he believed this surcoat possibly served to keep rain off the mail or to shade it from the heat of the sun, and at a later period to afford a field for display of heraldic bearings. The latter part of his statement is certainly true, but I'm highly skeptical of his assertion that the surcoat may have functioned primarily to keep the wearer's mail sheltered from the elements. First, the surcoat doesn't cover the mail entirely. Additionally, the surcoat, once wet, would transfer the moisture to the mail, and anyone who's worn mail from head to toe understands that moisture arises from one's own body as the person sweats. I do believe there are better explanations available. If we compare the armor and garments of the 11th century Norman knight to the 13th century English knight, there are three differences that I want to draw your attention to. The 13th century depiction clearly shows the development of armor on the body, with a lengthening of the mail on the arms and legs, as well as the basic shape of the helmet changing. It's covering more of the face, and then of course, it's hard to miss the brightly colored surcoats. The helmet developed to protect more of the wearer's face, head, and neck, so much so that he was unrecognizable in battle. Being recognized as a leader, as a king or a nobleman was important, as we'll discuss in a moment, But it's interesting to note that even in Norman times with a nasal-style helm, it may have been a problem easily identifying a person on the battlefield. For example, William the Conqueror is seen lifting his helmet on the Bayeux Tapestry to reveal to his men that he's still alive during or shortly after the Battle of Hastings. So besides the obvious reasons for commanders wanting to identify themselves in battle, why would the man-at-arms wish to be identified with symbols or a particular colored surcoat? One author, Charles Phillips, underlines the importance of both the attire of the man-at-arms as well as the opportunity to distinguish oneself in battle for personal individual gain when he writes, "Display was all important for the knight. His armor's chief purpose was of course protection, but almost as important was its function as a status symbol, the uniform of an elite. In battle, knights were also parading their wealth and seeking to win a glorious reputation." But what about the professional mounted soldier who bore no distinct social status? Well, the battlefield afforded him much the same kinds of opportunity. There was a chance that his deeds in battle would be noticed or rewarded, and in fact, it was possible for him to actually be knighted for his service. It was exceedingly more likely for the man-at-arms to be granted knighthood than for a common foot soldier. Even in defeat, knights and nobility had a somewhat unfair advantage. To be seen as a person of importance could determine whether a person was spared or dispatched by his enemy. It was commonplace to ransom knights and nobility when captured in battle. Generally, no such privilege was extended to commoners, as nothing could be gained financially from their capture. So to summarize, the surcoat for the 13th century English man-at-arms allowed the wearer to identify himself with a color or a symbol or design that he would take into battle. It was personal and meaningful to him, and it would allow him to be later identified should his deeds in battle warrant a reward or public commendation. And eventually, as the surcoat evolved, it would bear his coat of arms should he possess them. I hope this was enlightening, and thanks for joining me today. I'll talk to you later.